All right, folks, I'm ready to get started. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the second day of this class, the final day of the first week. So it's moving along. We're eventually going to get somewhere. We're not quite anywhere yet, but we're heading somewhere. So that's a good thing. I hope everybody's dealing okay with the first week and all the information and pressures and responsibilities and all this stuff that's being mounted upon you. Don't let it overwhelm you. Stay in the moment. You just have to think about, like, what do you have to do today? Don't think about, like, a million things that are going to be expected of you to do. You just think, okay, what can I do today? And then just kind of move from there. It's good to kind of just, like, when you already know at the beginning of the semester, like, what your schedule is going to be, what your responsibilities are going to be for the semester, kind of set out a schedule for yourself for the semester. Like, what's going to come up when? So, like, what should I be working on at any given time? You should always be working on something. When you have free time, that's like an opportunity for you to, like, get ahead so that later you don't get behind. So if you stay organized and you stay focused and you manage your time properly, you get to have a little bit of fun still during this time before things, like, get really serious, and prepare, like, yourself for a more manageable semester rather than just kind of letting things go and then wait until those moments where you get backed into a corner and your time becomes as scarce as possible and you just want to pull your hair out. So you're in this now, like, it started already. So it's time to just, like, be in it and just start doing things now. For those of you that are trying to get in the class, again, at the end of the class, I'm going to have you sign in to once again just, like, establish that you are dedicated to being in the class. As I already mentioned, the first week of class, it's all automated as far as the wait list. People will be let in if people drop out automatically based on the order of the wait list. And then beyond that, I will honor the order and I will give out positions as they pop up to people that have been coming to class regularly. And then once the wait list people are done, I'll give positions to the people that weren't on the wait list and have been trying to get in since the first day. Is anybody here that was not here on Tuesday trying to get into this class and not on the wait list? Nice. Good. All right. So are there any questions about anything? All right. Great. We're not quite there yet, huh? Not quite there at that time of confusion. As you likely saw, I sent an email out already just to let you know that I posted the files from Tuesday. So ideally, you've already gone on Moodle and you saw that I posted the lecture file, the video file, the PDF, the slideshow file, and ideally you've gone through the resources, just kind of seen, like, what's there, what's available to you. If you haven't, take a moment to do that. Take a moment to take a gander at the exams that are on there just to kind of get an idea of, like, how you're going to be tested in the class and, like, what you should be doing. On the exams, you'll need a scientific calculator. I don't allow graphing calculators because graphing calculators can save information. So make sure you have a scientific calculator to do some of the work that you'll be expected to do. And that's it. Now, are there any questions? All right, cool. So, the first part, don't worry about this first part. Today we're going to cover the first chapter, the fundamentals of managerial economics, just kind of setting up some of the basic ideas that underlie all of the models that we study in this class that, of course, then lead to the insights that the class generates for managing. But it is ultimately all economics, so it is all economic theory. So we're, again, going to be going through, like, the demand side of the market and then the supply side of the market, the supply side being the more complicated side, being the side that's most relevant to this course because those of you that are management majors, like, you're interested in, like, what kind of information you can glean from this class to help you manage better. And part of this course is to elucidate how complicated a market setting can be for a producer and sort of just kind of take us through the range of different possibilities that could exist in a market and how managers can best maneuver through them. But those are the insights you gain. In order to get those insights, we have to get really deep and specific about the models that we use in economics that get us to these insights. And so you have to be tracking the information as we're going along. You have to be learning the components that build up to the insights that finally um, you ultimately are most interested in. So that's why it's important for you to really stay plugged into the course. No matter how bogged down you feel at any given time, like don't give up, don't stop, keep going. If you get behind a day, make sure you catch up right away. Yes, in the end, like exams don't cover everything that I cover in class, but everything that I cover in class is fair game for the exam. And so um, people tend to like kind of wait till the last moment to just try to figure out what's he going to put on the exam, and then just kind of forget, well, there's actually a bigger purpose to this class. So they don't wind up walking away with the bigger picture that the class is meant to give you, and then they wind up not doing that well. So I'm really trying to reinforce right now the fact that it's important for you to be in this now and not jump ship early, like, and at no point just like kind of get into that mindset where like it's okay to kind of like let this class go a bit and then just kind of come back to it, because if you do that, it's a recipe for disaster, unfortunately. So uh, I want to drive these points home now to you, because again, like it tends to get uglier towards the middle and the end for people that again, like just that unplug from the class. So try not to let that happen, no matter what the class throws at you, because the class is what it is. It's a challenging course, and you just have to be okay with that. Like you have to just embrace it and just kind of submit to it. The semester will be over in May, so we're gonna be there eventually. All right, so just we'll go over some ideas that underlie the economics of effective management, and then just quickly touch on learning managerial economics, the best way to approach it, which is ultimately repetition, which is what I already mentioned and what I will continue to mention. And I do tend to move relatively quickly. But remember, I'm recording this, and you're not expected to learn everything as I'm teaching it. You're expected to go over the material several times. So this is your first pass. Take down some notes, listen to me. There'll be some moments where maybe like you might miss some stuff. Go back to it. Go back to the lecture. Listen to the whole lecture again. Take whole new notes, or just like fill in the gaps in your existing notes. Read the chapter. However you choose to approach it, no matter what approach you take, it should be about repetition. It should be about going through this stuff multiple times. So people that come to class and are thinking, well, class is the place to learn, that's not the case when you're talking about like courses like this that are highly technical, that use languages that are not necessarily yours nor intuitive. In courses like this, like you have to go through the information several times. It's not like a philosophy course or like a sociology course where like a lot of it is about like, let's talk about stuff and like come up with ideas and like be creative about, like that's not this course. Like I wish it was, but that's not economics. Economics is like we have these theories that underlie these models that then we use to sort of try to explain behavior or predict behavior, and it's very technical. Economics uses mathematics, it uses statistics. In fact, when I went into my PhD program, they basically just wanted me to have the math and the statistics. They didn't care if I knew economics, because economics you just learn. It's not that hard. It's those really skinny books that you covered in your introductory courses. What economics ultimately is, the challenge of it lies in the complexity of the tools that are used and the language that then results from those tools. So that's where the emphasis needs to be as far as the learning goes. And so that's what I emphasize. So I go through these concepts in fine detail, but again, it's not something that you will learn on your first pass. Just be aware of that. Be comfortable with the fact that the speed is what it is, and then again, in the end, you have a lot of work to do outside of this room. So make sure you do it. And if you don't do it, if for whatever reason things go bad for you because of A, B, or C, whatever's going on in your life, whatever's going on in your other classes, like own up to it, accept it. Like I did not do what I had to do well in a class like this. It doesn't mean I'm not capable of doing well in a class like this. It doesn't mean that I'm dumb. It doesn't mean that I can't excel at like very complicated things. It just means that you just don't yet know how to approach a class like this, if that winds up being the result. But let's not talk about that yet. Ideally, it won't happen. everything will work out for everybody, and we'll all walk away smiling. All right, so this chapter, we're gonna just cover how goals, constraints, incentives, and market rivalry affect economic decisions. We'll distinguish between accounting profits and costs and economic profits and costs. We'll explain the role of profits in a market economy. Profits are the emphasis of what we do here, and then we'll talk about why that is and sort of what that means to a firm. We'll apply what's called the five forces framework. It's just a general, simple model to just kind of think about, like, what are the things that most affect the profits of a firm? Like, just briefly touch upon those things, and then we'll kind of branch out to the more important concepts. And then finally, we'll apply marginal analysis to determine the optimal level of a managerial control variable. I'll talk about what that means in a second. And then we'll identify and apply 6 principles of effective managerial decision making. Anyway, so let's get moving here. So just generally, managerial economics is a valuable tool for analyzing business decisions. Billions are lost each year because many existing managers fail to use basic tools from managerial economics to do things such as like shape pricing and output decisions, which is like one of the main things that firm managers do. They decide on, how much are we going to produce and what price should we charge, and that's not an easy question to answer. It seems that way, but it's not. You have to understand the nature of the industry you're working in, the nature of your costs, etc. Things that we'll be talking about in fine detail for extended periods of time. Managers need to optimize the production process and input mix. So when you're producing, you have to choose the right amount of your inputs to minimize your costs so you can maximize your profits. Choose product quality, like what does the quality of your product need to be relative to the competitive conditions of the market you're operating in. Guide horizontal and vertical mergers. So horizontal mergers are between firms that are like the same. So like if there's 2 car manufacturers and they merge, then that's a horizontal merger. If there's a car manufacturer who is merging with the engine manufacturer that they use to put into their car to produce their final good and service that they sell to the public, then that is a vertical merger. They are merging along their supply chain. So they're taking, one of the components that's being produced, necessary to produce their final product, and incorporating it into their firm. So there's different types of mergers that managers need to decide which to do and when to do it if necessary. We'll talk about that later. Managers need to optimally design internal and external incentives. So incentive structures are super important. It's important for managers to understand that obviously workers, managers, and then the resource holders, the owners of the firm, all of the interests aren't always in line. And so incentive structures that do align those interests wind up leading to better results. So that's something we'll lightly touch upon. That's something that's more likely fleshed out in your other management courses for the management majors. So managerial economics is useful for both a Fortune 500 type company as well as for nonprofit organizations. So the ideas that we cover can be applied to a big scale firm or a small scale firm, or firms that don't make money for the sake of making money. They can also be used to provide insights into every facet of business and the non-business world, including household decision making. So you can always sort of adapt the ideas from this course to any kind of production process, right? In a sense, like managing a household is a production process. And so somehow you can apply some of the ideas by sort of just metaphorically thinking of certain things as costs, other things as benefits, as a firm would think of, the things that they pay for as costs and like the revenue they gain as benefit. So a manager in general, so another thing I'll be doing as I move along is I'll be emphasizing what are the things you should really be focusing on. So like the big philosophy stuff, not a big, like the stuff I just mentioned here is just meant to give you contextual information to kind of put your mindset within the theory that we're studying. Ultimately, what's important here is like the language that we use in this class. So like the terminology, so like the highlighted terminology is going to be important. And I'll emphasize the things that should be really focused on, like the models and like the methods that you use to calculate certain things, the concepts used within those models. Those are the things that I really need you to understand. And again, like, it's a good idea to check out the exams just to kind of see, okay, what is the end game for every part of the semester? How does all of this sort of lead to like my grade, right? That's ultimately the most important thing you're concerned about. So yeah, the terminology, very important. So managers, right? They direct the effort of others, obviously, purchase inputs used in the production of the firm's output, direct the product price and quality decisions. So economics itself is a science of making decisions in the presence of scarce resources. So like, how do we best use the things that we have a limited amount of, right? We have a limited amount of time. We have a limited amount of resources that we can use to produce. Like, how do we best use these resources to get the most amount of outcomes that will benefit society the most? So that's what economics ultimately is about. Resources are anything that can be used to produce a good or service, or more generally to achieve a goal. Decisions are important because they involve trade-offs, right? If you're doing one thing, you're not doing something else. So that's ultimately what we focus on in economics, is like individual decision making. Because if we focus on individual decision making, and then we aggregate that, combine it amongst similar decision makers over a population, then we get an economy. Everybody making these decisions winds up resulting in economic activity. So we start at like the individual, and then ultimately that gets us to insights about the whole. So that's what happens in microeconomics, and that's what this class is basically based on. In macroeconomics, it's more of like the big picture. How does the overall economy function? How can the government affect that? Things of that sort. So in this class, we won't really talk too much about the bigger issues: inflation, unemployment, output overall in the economy, and interest rates. We won't really talk about how they're set. We won't really talk about exchange rates, things of that sort. So international economic stuff we won't really talk about either. Time, as I mentioned, is one of the scarcest resources, and it's central to a lot of the analysis, because decisions are made in a moment, but they have effects throughout time, over long periods of time. So like decisions might be made about investing in a certain project. A certain project will extend maybe several years, and it'll be a while before profits are seen. So we'll talk about how that looks, just like in terms of mathematical analysis. All right, so managerial economics in general is a study of how to direct the scarce resources in the way that most efficiently achieves a managerial goal. So imagine that you are the manager of a Fortune 500 company that makes computers. So an important question maybe might be, should you purchase components from other manufacturers, or should you produce them yourself? Should you go to some other firm and buy that engine, or should you incorporate the production of that engine into your auto manufacturer firm? How many computers should you produce, and at what price should you sell them? If you're producing computers, should you produce 1,000? Should you produce 500? What's going to be the best given like your cost structure and the profits that you're ultimately interested in making, as well as the competitive conditions that you face? How can you ensure employees work hard and produce quality products? So that's about incentive structures. You have to be realistic about incentive structures. Thinking about like an employee's income as their incentive is not a good way to approach the situation, because by definition, if they are working for you, they are getting paid. And so they don't have an incentive from their pay to do anything extra beyond what they're expected to do. So it's important to kind of think about, well, how can incentive structures be created for employees to align their interests with those of the firm? So generally, profit sharing type of schemes tend to work the best. Again, we won't talk too much about that in this class, but it's something we'll lightly touch upon. How will the actions of rival computer firms affect your decisions, right? So like, what are your competitors doing? How competitive is the industry? If it's very competitive, then meaning that there's a bunch of sellers, then everybody's going to basically behave the same. But if there's only 1, 2, 3, 8 firms, then what your rivals are doing is very important to what you're doing. It's going to inform what you're doing. Like, you have to be very aware of what they're doing in order, in a way, kind of collectively be able to maximize what you can do in a market. It's tricky, and those are the cases we cover in the latter part of the course, because it's the more practical case, it's the more realistic case, it's the most common case in the real world, where most large industries have that kind of competitive structure where you have a few large firms dominating. And so, because it's complicated, there's a lot of different models I try to explain, like how to best maneuver through them. So we'll cover a few of those. Should you specialize in making one type of computer or produce several different types? So another good question that we will lightly touch upon. It will depend on cost structures. So the key to making good decisions is to know what information is needed to make an informed decision, and then to collect and process the data. So we'll lightly touch upon the procedures of collecting and then processing data in Chapter 3. So this course will show you how to perform this important managerial function. All right, so let's jump into the economics of effective management. So this course focuses on managerial decisions as they relate to maximizing profits, or more generally, the value of a firm. So in economics, it's when we're talking about like firm behavior, like companies. When we talk about firms, we're talking about companies. So when we talk about firms, we are always emphasizing their propensity, their desire, their drive to maximize their profits. And ultimately, that is because like firms are valued in terms of like what their profit streams are. So like firms will have like contracts out for, whatever over a period of time. Those guarantee a certain amount of profits over time, and those profits represent the value of the firm. And so firms want to maximize their profits because they want to maximize their value, because the more valuable they are, the better things are. They can sell their stocks higher, etc. So first, we have to understand 6 basic principles that comprise effective management. The first one is to identify goals and constraints. So knowing your goals allows you to identify which decisions you need to make. Constraints can make it difficult for managers to achieve goals. So it's important to understand, like, what is holding me back, and what can I do about that, and what can't I do about that. The second important principle of effective management is to recognize the nature and the importance of profits. So let's talk about the difference between economic and accounting profits, an important distinction that you need to understand in this class in order to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about profits in this course, and ultimately the best way to understand profits. So accounting profit is just the total amount of money taken in from sales, which is the total revenue. Revenue is price times quantity. So whatever you're selling has a price. That times the amount you sell is your revenue. So it's the revenue minus the dollar cost of producing goods or services. So the revenue minus just the flat out dollar cost of producing whatever it is you're producing gets you your accounting profit. It's a standard way that accountants account for, profits, things that you've probably learned in an accounting course if you've already taken it. But it doesn't take into consideration all the important costs. And in economics, we consider not just these explicit costs of producing, but also the implicit costs of producing, which I'll talk about right now. So economic profit is the difference between the total revenue and the total opportunity cost versus just cost of producing a firm's goods and services. So the opportunity costs are costs that include both the explicit, the accounting cost of resources, and the implicit cost of giving up the best alternative use of those resources. So you guys here, you're in college, you are essentially producing your education, what we call human capital in economics, like your skills, your knowledge, that's going to allow you to then get out there and flourish wherever you wind up. You're incurring costs to do that. The explicit cost is the cost that you guys pay for college. So you're paying for your tuition, you're paying for your books, you're paying for your housing. Those are explicit costs. But there's also an implicit cost to being here. So while you are here, you are not working and earning a wage. So that amount of money that you could be earning is an implicit cost of your education. So it's also a cost. So therefore, these two costs, these explicit and the implicit costs make up the opportunity cost. And so the economic profit is the difference between the total revenue, the price times quantity, minus the opportunity costs, both explicit and implicit costs. So economic profit will generally be less than accounting profit because we're subtracting the implicit costs as well. So there'll be more costs subtracted from the revenue. So again, implicit costs might be hard to measure, so managers can often overlook them, which is a mistake. Effective managers continuously seek out data from other sources to identify and quantify implicit costs. So we'll go through an example right now. Suppose you own a building in New York that you used to run a small pizzeria. Food suppliers are your only accounting costs. So you're producing pizzas, you're just paying for the tomato sauce, the cheese, etc. to make your pizza. Those are your explicit costs, your accounting costs. So at the end of the year, your accountant informs you that these costs were, let's say, 20 grand, and that your revenues were 100 grand from selling pizzas. So your accounting profits are therefore going to be your revenue, 100,000 minus the 20,000. So your accounting profits will be $80,000. Seems like things are going well. Seems like you're doing a good job. Seems like you should continue operating. So these accounting profits, unfortunately, do overstate your economic profits. The costs do not include the time you spent running the business. So you could have spent time working for somebody else and earning income. So let's say you worked for someone else for, let's say, $30,000 for the year. Then your opportunity cost of your time is $30,000 for the year. So the 30,000 accounting profits that we accounted for earlier are not profits, but they're one of your implicit costs of running the pizzeria. The accounting costs also do not take into consideration that if you did not run the pizzeria, you could have rented out this building that you're running your pizzeria. So if the rental value of the building, let's say, is $100,000 for the year, you gave up this amount to run your business, which again is another implicit cost. So economic profits are, again, your revenue minus your opportunity costs, which are equal to your explicit plus implicit costs. Your revenue is $100,000 from selling the pizza. So this is the kind of calculation I would expect you to be able to do. So you need to understand the difference between economic and accounting profit and how to account for the different types of explicit and implicit costs and be able to calculate both. Explicit costs, again, $20,000 for buying pizza components, ingredients. Implicit costs, you've got that 30,000 in wages you missed, you've got that 100,000 in rent you missed. So your implicit costs are 130,000. So your opportunity costs, therefore your explicit plus implicit costs, are 130,000 plus 20,000, which is 150,000. So your economic profits are that $100,000 in revenue, the price times quantity, the stuff you sold, minus the $150,000 in opportunity costs. And therefore, your economic profits are negative $50,000. So you're not doing as well as you thought you were doing because you didn't account for your opportunity costs. Your implicit costs were not factored in, and they are factored in when we're talking about successful businesses. So it's something to keep in mind whenever you're managing a business, to understand that anytime you're doing something with your resources, you're not doing something else with them, and that needs to be accounted for as well. So throughout the course, when we refer to costs, anytime we're talking about costs, we're always talking about opportunity costs in this course. So just always keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about the role of profits. So profits of businesses signal where society's scarce resources are best allocated, right? So we've got investors in the world. They're trying to figure out, where they should invest their money. If one industry is making profits, and that's a signal to resource holders, I should be investing over here versus over here. A scarce resource is their investment capital. And so, again, profits are a strong signal to allocate our productive resources to those places that will benefit society the most by generating the most profits. But profits aren't the only way society is benefited from markets, and we'll talk more about that in the next chapter. So when profits of companies in an industry increase, in any particular industry, if the profits increase, then the opportunity cost to resource holders that are looking for their best investment goes up, right? If they're investing somewhere else, then the profit they're not making is their opportunity cost. So if profits go up in one industry, then their opportunity cost goes up. Then they're like, okay, I need to be over here in order to maximize my economic profit. So this induces new firms to enter the markets in which economic profits are available. New firms enter a market, supply increases. Whenever supply increases, price falls. That means the profits will fall as well. So as firms enter the industry, the market price falls and economic profits decline. All right, let's talk about this 5 forces framework and how they're related to industry profitability. So many interrelated forces and decisions influence the level, the growth, and sustainability of profits. Throughout the course, we'll examine a variety of business strategies designed to enhance your prospects of earning and sustaining profits, the value of a firm. So the 5 forces framework organizes many complex managerial economic issues into 5 categories or forces that impact the sustainability of industry profits. So let's talk about this 5 forces framework. All right, so again, central to all of this are the level, growth, and sustainability of industry profits. So the first force that affects that is entry. How easy is it for other firms to enter or exit the market? The things that that will stop firms from entering the market are called barriers to entry. The most significant one is like a patent, right? So like if a firm has a patent over something that nobody else can produce, then that's a barrier to entry. Nobody else can come in and compete against you because you're the only one that's legally allowed to produce this one thing, right? So that's a barrier to entry. So that'll create a less competitive environment, which will increase profits. So again, entry heightens competition and reduces the margins of existing firms. So if you have an industry where, like, let's say everybody's selling corn, anybody can make corn. Like you just buy, you buy some farmland, you buy the farming equipment, get the seeds, bam, you got corn. Anybody can do it. It's a very competitive industry. There are really no barriers to entry in that kind of industry. So in that kind of industry, profits are going to be low because prices will be low because there'll be so much competition in the markets that really nobody will have any leverage in the market to be able to set prices high and make, high profits. Another force that is important is the power of input suppliers. So industry profits tend to be lower when suppliers have the power to negotiate favorable terms for their input. So if you're a car manufacturer, you're looking at that engine, you're thinking, all right, I need that engine for my car, but this one supplier is one of 2 people that make this engine, and they have leverage over me because I can't go anywhere else to make this engine, and I need this engine to sell my car. And so the input supplier knows that, so they're like, well, they need me, so I'm going to charge them super high prices because I can, because they're not going to buy from anybody else. And that's in contrast to a situation where, let's say, you're talking about like, I don't know, door handles or something, and there's like 1,000 people that make the same door handle, and it's like not complicated to make, and anybody can make it. That means everybody's selling it. That means it's cheap. That means the input suppliers aren't going to have much power because if anybody's trying to charge you a higher price, you jump ship and you go to the competitor. So again, depending on how much leverage the input supplier has, that's going to affect your costs, which will affect your profits. Power of buyers. So there might be situations where like there's only one buyer for your good, and if there's only one buyer for your good, then that's the only entity, person, company that you could sell to. And if they don't buy from you, then nobody's going to buy from you because you make a very particular thing that only they need. And so if that is a situation, they're going to have leverage over you, right? Like they're going to be able to say, well, I'm the only person buying from you. You better sell this to me at this price. If you don't, I'm jumping ship. So that's obviously the extreme case. So it just highlights the nature of like that force on profit. So the less buyers there are for your good, the more leverage they have over you, the less you can charge, the lower your profits. Industry rivalry. So again, like how competitive is the firm? So industries with high concentration, few firms tend to have more sustainable profits. So when we're talking about concentration, we're talking about concentration of market share. So market share is like how much of my profits, how much are my profits as a portion of like the entire profits in the industry. When you're talking about high concentration, you have a few firms that basically dominate the market, and their market shares are enormous, right? Like, so if there's three, they each have a third of the market share. So that's a highly concentrated industry versus like, an industry where everybody's selling oranges and everybody has like 1,000th or 1 millionth of the profits that are available in that industry. It's not a very concentrated industry, an industry like that. So that's what we're talking about with high concentration. We're talking about concentration of market share. So again, if you have few firms, then profits tend to have more. Industries with high concentration tend to have more sustainable profits because those few firms generally tend to have what's called market power, the ability to charge above their costs. And in order for there to be a few firms, there have to be barriers to entry, right? So in order for for firms to operate, generally what they're going to have is like a size advantage, meaning that in order to operate at a profitable level, you have to be pretty big. So if other firms want to come in and compete, they have to be that big too. So they have to have the capital to set up shop and be able to compete with you, which is itself a barrier to entry as well. Because again, like you need to set up factories and all sorts of production lines that cost a lot of money that will eventually get you to profitability. And so the firms that are able to operate in those industries, because they're so large, will wind up being able to sell the good that they're selling at a lower price than, let's say, somebody that were to come in and try to set up a smaller shop. Like those folks would wind up having higher cost structures, things that we're going to talk about later in fine detail. Believe me, I'm being very abstract here just to kind of give you a general idea of how this force works. But cost advantage is a huge barrier to entry. It has a lot to do with size. It's called increasing returns to scale, which we'll talk about later. And ultimately, the more concentrated an industry is, the less firms will operate in that industry, the less competitive the environment will be. That means the higher prices they can charge. That means the higher their profits will be. And finally, the availability of the level of sustainable industry profits also depend on the price and value of interrelated products and services. So substitutes and complements, concepts you covered in your intro economics course. Complements are goods that are sold together. People buy them together. So like peanut butter and jelly are complements, right? People buy peanut butter in this country generally along with jelly. So if the price of jelly goes up, people buy less peanut butter as well as buying less jelly. Substitutes, basically just goods that can substitute for the good you're selling. So if you're selling a car and somebody else is selling a car, their car is a substitute for your car. So depending on the price of substitutes, it will affect how much people are going to buy from you. Depending on the price of the complements to your good, it will affect how much people will buy from you. And that will affect the growth, sustainability, and level of your profits. All right, third principle of effective management, understanding incentives. I already mentioned about the situation with the workers and like how the wages are not enough of an incentive. That's basically what we're talking about here. So changes in profit provide an incentive to resource holders to alter their use of resources. That's another case I mentioned. Within a firm, incentives affect how resources are used and how hard workers work. To succeed as a manager, you must have a clear grasp of the role of incentives within an organization, such as a firm, and how to construct incentives to induce maximal effort from those you manage. So again, that's something that we'll lightly touch upon here. For those management majors, I'm sure you have whole classes that deal with these issues, so I'll let them inform you more about that stuff. Developing a mechanism such that if the employee does what is in his or her own interest, she will then do what is in the interest of the manager. All right. Fourth principle of effective management, understanding markets. So the power or bargaining position of consumers and producers in a market is limited by three sources of rivalry that exist in economic transactions. So there's the consumer-producer rivalry, right? Consumers want to buy stuff at the cheapest price possible. Producers want to sell stuff at the highest price possible. So the interests are certainly not in line. There's a rivalry there. You are antagonists, right? You are against each other. Consumers attempt to negotiate or locate low prices while producers attempt to negotiate high prices. If either party is asking for the price that the other doesn't agree on, the transaction won't occur, as you know. There's another rivalry, though. There's the consumer-consumer rivalry, right? So like I mentioned before, if there's one buyer, they have no rivalry, so they have a lot of leverage. But if there are many consumers, then it reduces the negotiating power of consumers in the marketplace, which then heightens your profits. Scarcity leads to rivalry among consumers for goods. So the less available a good is, the more the consumers will fight each other for them, the less leverage they'll have, the higher they'll be willing to pay for the goods. Producer-producer rivalry, the last sort of dimension of rivalry in a market is, of course, the competition among sellers. And as I already mentioned, if you have a few small firms dominating a market, there's going to be some competition, but not a lot, and that will actually raise profits because they'll be able to charge higher prices. The firms that offer the best quality product at the lowest price earn the right to serve the customer. So quality is another dimension that firms can compete on. And then, of course, there is a government that fortunately exists to sort of be around in case markets fail, which they do. There is such a thing as market failure when markets are not allocating goods properly because there's a lot of large firms with high market share that are then kind of just raising prices to ridiculous levels because they can. People are being left out of those markets that could be buying otherwise. So then, governments might come in to sort of try to regulate situations like that. There's situations where there's like external costs to what's being done, like pollution, that sort of thing, that aren't being taken into account by the firms themselves. Government plays a role there. So when agents on either side of a market find themselves disadvantaged in the market process, they frequently attempt to induce the government to intervene on their behalf. In a market for electricity, in most towns, there's only one supplier, right? So it doesn't make sense in certain circumstances to have more than one seller. You can't have like 30 different electric companies serving a neighborhood. You're going to need 30 different sets of power lines to supply the electricity, right? Like, just doesn't make sense. It makes sense for there to be only one. But in a situation like that, you should have a government intervention in some way to sort of mitigate that one firm's ability to exploit their monopoly power, right? If you have one firm in the market, they are a monopoly. If they're a monopoly, they can basically do whatever they want as far as charging prices because they're the only ones selling the good. And everybody needs electricity. We're not going to go back to 1838. Like, we want our electricity. We're going to pay for it, whatever you're going to charge me. That's when the government comes in and says, well, you can't charge that much, folks. People need to have reasonable prices. And so there's ways of accounting for what is reasonable via economic theory or whatnot. So it's not just like a general sort of idealistic approach. It's a practical approach, but it is necessary in some circumstances. So in these situations, no producer-producer rivalry exists. Consumers then can initiate action by a public utility commission to limit the power of utilities to set prices. All right, fifth principle. This one will be a little bit more technical because we're going to talk about present value analysis. So it's important for managers to recognize the time value of money, that money changes value over time because of opportunity costs. So the time of many decisions involves a gap between the time when the costs are born of a project and when the benefits of the project are received. So you're going to, again, you're entering maybe the auto industry. You're going to set up shop. It's going to take a while, a couple of years to build your factory. It's going to take a few years to develop your designs for your cars, blah, blah, blah. You're going to pay a lot out right now, but you know it's all going to lead to profits, and you can kind of calculate what those profits are going to look like over time. But over time, conditions change in the economy that will affect the value of the dollar, and so it's important to take that into consideration when you're thinking about the time value of money. So $1 today is worth more than $1 received in the future. The reason is that the opportunity cost of receiving the dollar in the future is the foregone interest that could be earned were $1 received today. So if you had $1 today and invested in a bond that gave you 5% in the future per year, let's say 5% per year, then in the future your dollar's worth $1.05. So again, if you just have $1 in the future, then that's going to be worth less than the dollar today, because the dollar today in that future time will be worth $1.05. So the opportunity cost of money reflects the time value of money. So to properly account for the timing of receipt and expenditures, the manager must understand present value analysis, something else that I need you to understand and be able to calculate. We'll go over an example right now, a couple of examples. So present value. So some of you have already covered this in the past. If you haven't, I'm going to go over it. Make sure you practice and make sure you get it down. So the amount that would have to be invested today at the prevailing interest rate to generate a given future value is the present value. So if somebody offered you, let's say, $1.10 a year from today, and you're asked, what is the present value today? Well, let's say $1 today at a guaranteed interest of 10%. A year from now would be worth, of course, that dollar times 110% in decimal, 1.10. So that's going to be $1 plus 10 cents, which is $1.10. Over the course of a year, your dollar would earn 10 cents in interest. Thus, when the interest rate is 10%, the present value of receiving $1.10 a year from now in the future is $1. So the future value is $1.10, and the present value is $1. That gets us to the formula for present value. The present value, which we denote PV, of a future value, FV, received T years in the future, is equal to the future value divided by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the Tth power, the amount of years. So that's the formula. I'm going to show you how to derive it right now. You don't need to know how to derive the formula, but it's always good to understand where these formulas come from. So anytime you're presented with a formula in a class or even at a job, you don't want to just think of it as like a black box where you just don't know how the inner workings work. You want to go further. You want to figure it out, even if you're not expected to, because in the future, then you can apply that knowledge to something and impress somebody and then maybe get you further. You don't just want to take things at their face value ever. If there's something that's not being explained to you, do the work on your own. Figure it out. What does this mean? How does this work? How can I like maybe use the depth of the information that underlies it to my advantage? So just that's always something to keep in mind. It's an important approach you should have. Anyway, this is the present value formula. I is the rate of interest, which is the opportunity cost of the funds. So I'll just show you how to derive this formula right now. Again, I don't expect you to know this derivation. I'm just going to show you how to get to the formula. So to explain the formula, consider there's some initial investment that you're going to make. Let's just use the placeholder P subscript 0, which is described as P naught. So whenever you have that subscript 0, it's naught. So P naught is the initial investment amount. It's just a placeholder for some amount with the interest rate I, and it's compounded annually. So at the end of a year, you get that extra interest, and then the next year, that amount plus the interest is added with interest on that, which I'll show you right now. So that's what it means. That's what it means to compound annually. So it grows according to the simple rule that at the end of each year, the amount I times S is added to the investment, where S is the value of the investment at the end of the previous year. So if we let S of T denote the value of the investment after T years, then S of 0 is just your initial investment. So S of 0, 0 being the time period that you're in now. We haven't moved in time, so S of 0 is just your initial investment, P naught. That's what you're investing in, a bond, whatever, some sort of investment vehicle. End of the first year, you've got that amount, P naught, plus that amount times the interest rate. So here we've got an expression where we've got a like term, which is P naught, which can be factored out. So we factor out P naught. We have P naught times 1 plus I. So that's the value of your investment at the end of the first year. Second year, you're taking this amount into the second year, and then you're adding the amount of interest you can get from this. So you multiply, so you add this times the interest rate. So here's that same term times the interest rate. Again, you've got a like term here. It happens to be this larger expression, P naught 1 plus I, the amount of your investment at the end of the first year. You can factor that out. So you're left with P naught 1 plus I times 1 plus I, 1 plus I times 1 plus I, same term, so that's 1 plus I squared. You're multiplying the same term together. So you have the value of your investment at the end of the second year equals P naught times 1 plus I squared. That amount is being invested the third year, multiplied by the interest rate. You've got a like term again, factor that out, this like term, multiplied times 1 plus I, that gets you to P naught 1 plus I raised to the third power. This continues on until the teeth year, whatever that final period is. So in that final period, you're going to have the amount that you had in the second to last period. So you've got T minus 1 as the exponent of what's being invested. So here in the second period, you had P naught 1 plus I raised to the second power, and that's what went into the third period. So at the beginning of each period, you have some amount from the prior period. So in the teeth period, the last period, you've got this amount from the prior period, T minus 1, plus that amount times I. You factor that out, and then you wind up with 1 plus I raised to the power of T minus 1 times 1 plus I raised to the power of T. Whenever you have two terms that have a common base, and they're being multiplied, and they each have exponents, then you add the exponents. We'll talk about properties of exponents at some point, just to kind of refresh your memory, but you should know that stuff. And if you don't, if you're kind of rusty on it, you should just look it up online, look up some problems, do like an hour's worth of them, just properties of exponents, how do I manage exponents, like multiplying, dividing, whatever, you'll get it again quickly. You all learned it at some point. If it's not here right now, it's in there somewhere. You just got to dig it out, and then you got to refine it, and you got to bring it to the forefront so you can just like have it as part of your arsenal. All right, so again, P naught 1 plus I raised to the T to the minus 1 power times 1 plus I. So you've got 1 plus I raised to the T minus 1 power plus 1, which then gets you just P naught 1 plus I raised to the Tth power. So S of t is also the future value that we've been talking about, FV, and P naught is the present value, so P naught is PV. So this is essentially PV times 1 plus IT, which equals ST, which equals the future value. If we divide both sides by 1 plus I raised to the Tth power, then you get to the present value formula that I showed you earlier. So that's how you derive the present value formula. And you should know how to use it. You should know how to derive it too, just intuitively so you understand where it comes from. But anyway, you should know this formula in this class. So an example, the present value of $100 in 10 years, if the interest rate is 7%, is $50.76. So you've got $100, which is the future value. You're looking at that value in 10 years, so you're looking at it in that 10th period. Periods being defined as years. So you've got 100 divided by 1 plus the interest rate, 7% in decimals 0.07, so 1 plus 0.07, raised to the power of t, the amount of years, which is 10. Now, in order to calculate anything ever, you have to remember the order of operations, right? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So always have that with you. Whenever you're doing any math problem, you have to apply that, because if you don't, you get the wrong answer. So please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Simple expression. We all learned it at some point. You can have a variation on it if you want, whatever, come up with your own thing, but just make sure the first letters are the same. Anyway, so parentheses, right? So we add the stuff in parentheses first. Excuse exponents, raise that to the power of 10, and then division, you divide 100 by 1.97, which is 1.07 raised to the 10th power, and that gets you to 5076. So that's the present value of $100 10 years from now with an interest rate of 7%. This means that if you invested $50.76 today at a 7% interest rate, in 10 years, the investment would be worth $100. Yeah. Of course, yeah. So scientific calculators only, though. I would expect you to. I wouldn't expect you to do it without a calculator. Yeah. Since the interest rate is on the denominator of the equation, the larger the interest rate, the smaller the present value of a future payment. So there's like a whole industry around deciding that interest rate, right? Because like Like I said, the value of a firm is the present value of their income stream, of their profits. And so, like, if you're selling your firm, you want the value of your firm to be the highest possible, right? So then you're going to say, well, my interest rate, the interest rate we've chosen is going to be this one, low. And then the people buying are going to be like, wait a minute, where'd you get that interest rate? And they're going to be like, oh, well, we made these calculations about how the central bank might change things, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, no, we don't know that's going to happen. This is going to be the interest rate. We want the higher interest rate so we can get the lower present value, so we get the lower cost to what we're buying. So that interest rate is so key, and it's obviously right now we're just talking about an interest rate. What does that mean? What interest rate are we talking about? Well, it's very general. There's a lot of different interest rates, and we could be talking about a lot of things. And so it becomes very contentious. So there's like a whole industry surrounding like just figuring out what these interest rates are. And there's like just whole law firms that are dedicated to fighting the fights of like trying to decide what is going to be that interest rate that we're going to use for what's called our discount factor, 1 over this factor, to get us to the present value of whatever. It's actually a very lucrative industry. It might be a little bland, but in the long run, there's money there. So it might be something you might be interested in looking into. Anyway, the basic idea of present value of a future value can be extended to a series of future payments. So if you are promised, let's say, some future value 1, so I subscripted 1 there to denote the fact that that future value is specific to the 1 period, the 1 year in the future. And FV subscript 2 denotes the fact that that's the future value in 2 years. They're different from each other. And so on for, let's say, n years. Then the present value of this sum of future payments is going to equal the present value of that future payment plus the present value of the future second period. So this one's being discounted by 1 divided by 1 plus I raised to the first power because it's the first year. This one's being discounted by 1 plus I raised to the second power because it's the second year. Third, same thing, all the way to the nth year. So you have some future value in that nth period divided by 1 plus I raised to that nth power, whatever that period is. And we can denote that, we can summarize this expression in this, what's called sigma notation. It's just a way to summarize a long expression. This symbol here just means like we're adding things together. This below just says we're adding things together from the first period, and then this up here says the last period. So t equals 1 is the first period, all the way to the last period n. So that's what this signifies. And then you've got this term here, which is the same and only changes based on the t, right? So t equals 1, so you put in 1, 1, and you've got that first term there. T equals 2, you've got that second term there. You're adding them because that's what the sigma is telling us, and then all the way to the nth, to whatever that last period is. Don't ever be intimidated by notation. Always try to understand it. I was intimidated by it. Like when I first saw this, I was like, what is that? We never saw that in algebra or like calculus. Actually, we did see it in calculus. We didn't see it in like trigonometry. You know, earlier classes, if you didn't go further in math, like you've always seen these things, but it was never really explained to you. So you've seen it so long over long periods of time where it becomes kind of intimidating to you. Things like that, you really just need to take hold of and say, okay, I'm going to figure it out and just figure it out and then be done with it. Anything that intimidates you, just like figure it out and just make it unintimidating. All right, so this is the formula of a present value of a stream. The most important thing to consider as a manager, though, is the net present value. It's the present value of the income stream generated by a project minus the current cost of the project. So the net present value equals the present value of your income stream minus the cost. C naught denotes the fact that those costs are borne in this period today. So if the net present value is positive, so let's say you calculated the present value of an income stream for your auto firm and you've subtracted your cost from that, if that's positive, then that's telling you it's worth your time to invest all this money and wait like 5 years for profits. Versus, if you get a negative net present value where you say, no, I shouldn't invest here, I should move elsewhere. So that's the formula, the net present value formula. So suppose that by sinking C0 dollars into a project today, a firm will generate income of FV1 1 year in the future, FV2 2 years in the future, and so on for n years. If the interest rate is I, the net present value of the project will be the present discounted value of the income stream, again, what we already established, minus the costs that are borne today. So I will expect you to be able to do this kind of calculation, so just keep that in mind. quick, just like kind of interesting case. There's an easy way to figure out the present value of an infinitely lived asset, an asset that pays out an amount forever. So some decisions generate cash flows that continue indefinitely. The formula would continue indefinitely, but certain patterns of future cash flows are more easily computed. So suppose every period's cash flow, so each period's cash flows are actually exactly the same. So let's just label them CF. Then the present value of a perpetual asset, an asset that pays you the same amount forever, is equal to the individual payments you get each period divided by the interest rate. That's it. So examples of such assets include perpetual bonds and preferred stocks. So a bond is just like a loan asset, and a perpetual bond is called a consul. So there's like consuls from like the Napoleonic Wars and like old like situations that occurred centuries ago that required borrowing that, you know, for whatever reason they decide we're going to issue perpetual bonds to generate funds. And so those bonds still exist and are still being sold in markets, and this is generally how they're priced. But the formulas are a little bit more complicated. Each of these assets pay the owner a fixed amount at the end of each period indefinitely. Present value analysis is also useful in determining the value of a firm, as I mentioned, since the value of a firm is the present value of the stream of profits, their cash flows, generated by the firm's physical, human, and intangible assets. In particular, if pi naught, so in economics we use pi to denote profits. If pi naught is the firm's current level of profits and pi 1 is next year's level of profits and so on, then the value of a firm is the profits today plus the discounted value of the profits a year from now plus the discounted value of the profits 2 years from now, all the way to however many years. So that's the value of a firm. The value of a firm today is the present value of its current and future profits, as I mentioned, and that's how it's calculated. Firm ownership represents a claim to assets with an indefinite profit stream. So stocks, when you buy stocks, you're essentially buying a claim to that firm's profits indefinitely until whenever you sell the stock or the company fails. So it just gets us to the principle of profit maximizations. When economists say that the goal of a firm is to maximize profits, we mean that the firm's goal is to maximize its value, which is the present value of current and future profits. Beyond the scope of this class is learning the actual more complicated formulas used by Wall Street analysts to value firms. So what I've taught you here is just like the basic core expressions that are used to value firms, but there's obviously more variables that are thrown in because the world is more complex than what we just talked about. But this is like the foundation of how it all works. All right, and the last principle we'll talk about is using marginal analysis. So an effective manager needs to understand how to use marginal analysis. So marginal analysis is one of the most important managerial tools. Marginal analysis states that optimal managerial decisions involve comparing marginal or incremental benefits of a decision with the marginal or incremental costs. So if we let B of Q denote the total benefits derived from Q units of output, so that could be like revenue. You're producing a certain amount, you get a certain amount of revenue. That's your benefit. Right now, we're just generally calling that benefit B of Q. And let's say C of Q denotes the total cost to a firm of producing Q units of output. So the cost you bore with paying your workers, setting up your factory, etc. So we'll distinguish between two different types of cases, one where there's discrete decisions and one where there's continuous decisions. So we first consider the case where the managerial control variable, the variable that the manager can decide on, which is generally the quantity of output. Let's say that variable is discrete. The manager, when we say discrete, cannot use fractional values of Q, only integers, so like 0 and whole numbers, 1 through whatever. This reflects the discrete nature of the problem. So here we have a table that represents the discrete values of the control variable Q. So suppose the object of the manager is to maximize the net benefit, the difference between the total benefits and the total cost. So that's what net benefit is, the difference between benefit and cost. So it would be like your revenue minus your cost. So here's the control variable. Here's how much you're willing to produce, right? I'll produce 1 car, I'll produce 2 cars, 3, etc. Here's how much I can generate in revenue. The revenue increases. Here's how much I can generate in cost. My costs increase as I increase the amount. And then there's a difference between those two, which is my net benefit, right? So I produce one car, my benefit's 90. One car, my cost is 10. So the difference between the two, 90 minus 10, is my net benefit, which is 80. So notice that net benefit in the example is maximized when net benefit equals 200. So that's where it gets the most. Beyond that point, it starts to go down, and earlier than that point, it's also less than it. Now, what's most important to focus on, though, is the marginal part of the situation. So there's going to be a marginal benefit, the change in total benefit arising from a change in the managerial control variable Q. So you're also going to have marginal cost, the change in the total cost arising from a change in the managerial control variable Q. So your marginal benefit is the change in total benefit as you move from 1 to 2 to however many cars. So let's say moving from the first to the second car, your total benefit for the first car is 90. Your total benefit to you, the firm, all the revenue you make from selling 2 cars is 170. But the marginal benefit of selling that second car is the difference between the total benefit of your second car and the total benefit of your first car, which is 170 minus 90, which is going to equal, in this case, 80. And then the costs are the same. So the total cost of producing 1 car is 10. The total cost of producing 2 cars is 30 to the firm. So the marginal benefit, the extra cost from producing that second car, is the difference between your total cost on the second car and your total cost on the first car, which is 20. So there's your marginal cost, 20 of that second car. Third car costs you 30. Fourth car costs you 40. Third car benefits you 70. Fourth car benefits you 60. So these are your marginal benefits. These are your marginal costs, Gesundheit. The marginal net benefit of producing Q are the change in net benefits that arise from one unit change in Q. So going from the first car to the second car, we had the net benefit at 1 car to be 80. That's the difference between your total benefit and your total cost, which is 80. For the second car, you had a net benefit of 140, the difference between your total benefit of 170 and your total cost of 30. The marginal net benefit, the change in your net benefit from producing that second car, is the difference between the net benefit of producing 1 car and the net benefit of producing 2 cars. So 140 minus 80, which is equal to 60. Make sure you are able to calculate all of these and understand the difference between all of them. Marginal net benefit is also the difference between the marginal benefit and marginal cost. So marginal net benefit is also the difference between the extra benefit you gain from producing 1 more car and the extra benefit you gain from, the extra cost you incur by producing 1 more car. So producing that second car, your marginal benefit was 80. Producing the second car, your marginal cost was 20. So your marginal net benefit is 60. So that's another way to calculate the marginal net benefit. The table reveals an important pattern. By using 5 units, the manager ensures that net benefit is maximized. So at 5 units, we know net benefit is at 200, and that's the point where marginal net benefit is equal to 0. So at that level, marginal net benefit is equal to 0. Furthermore, at 5 units, the marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. So to maximize your net benefit, you had to produce at the point where your marginal benefit equaled your marginal cost, or where the marginal net benefit is equal to 0. That gets us to the principle. To maximize total benefit, the manager should increase the managerial control variable up to the point where marginal benefits equal marginal costs. This level of the managerial control variable corresponds to the level at which marginal net benefits are 0. Nothing more can be gained by further changes in the variable. If you go any further, your marginal net benefit becomes negative. So your net benefit is maximized when you produce 5 units where your marginal net benefit is equal to 0, where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Notice that while 5 units of Q maximize net benefits, it does not maximize total benefits. So total benefits are maximized when you produce 10 cars. Total benefits, I already said that. The reason that net benefit maximizing level of Q is less than the Q that maximizes total benefit is that there are costs that are incurred to achieve total benefits. The goal of maximizing net benefit takes costs into account while the goal of maximizing total benefit does not. So in the context of a firm, maximizing total benefit is tantamount equal to maximizing revenues without considering costs. So you have to consider costs. So you have to look at net benefit to maximize that. You want to set it, you want to produce at the point where marginal benefit equals marginal costs. And then the other case we're going to look at is the continuous decision. So that was discrete, where the numbers are only whole numbers. You're producing 1 car, 2 cars, 3 cars. But in the real world, you can produce fractional numbers of things, right? If you're selling gas, you can produce fractional amounts of gas, etc. So the basic principles for making decisions when the control variable is discrete also apply to the case of continuous control variables. So the figure depicts the total benefit and total cost of using different levels of Q. So our X variable here, our independent variable, is the quantity that can be produced. It's the control variable. And then costs and benefits are the dependent variables. They depend on how much you produce, right? Here is the relation between benefit and costs. And here's benefit and quantity produced. And here's the relation between costs and quantity produced. The net benefit is maximized at the point where the difference between the benefit curve and the cost curve are at the greatest. In general, the slope of the benefit curve is equal to the change in B over the change in Q, which is also the marginal benefit. So for total benefit, if you take the slope of it, which is also the derivative, that will get you to the marginal benefit. So the slope of the line at that point is the marginal benefit. The slope of CQ, the change in C over the change in Q, is equal to the marginal cost. So here's our cost curve. The slope at any given point is going to give us our marginal cost at a given point. At this point, the slope of this line tells us the slope at that point. It tells us the marginal cost at that point. The slopes are equal when net benefits are maximized. So when we're our maximum net benefit, when these curves are furthest away from each other, marginal cost equals marginal benefit. So it's just another way of saying that when net benefit is maximized, marginal benefit equals marginal cost. So we're going to get to the same ideas that we got to in the table, just graphically. But I won't expect you to know graphs and be able to graph things. I'll be able to understand what the graphs are telling you, but be able to do things mathematically. And that's why I say you should know how to calculate these things that I just covered. So this figure represents net benefit, the difference between those two curves, the distance between them, right? First it was small, then it was big, then it got small again. So that's why the curve gets big, then small. It also represents the vertical distance between B and C, as I mentioned in the previous figure. Again, the net benefit is maximized when the distance is greatest. The slope at this point is equal to 0, right? Whenever a curve is at its maximum, at that maximum point, the derivative, the slope at that point is going to be equal to 0, right? Something you learned in calculus. So therefore, the marginal net benefit is equal to 0 at the point where the net benefits are at their maximum, just like we saw in that table. So again, the slope of this line here is equal to 0 at the maximum point. This last figure depicts marginal cost and marginal benefit. And marginal net benefit, so the difference between the two, again, which is also the slope of that net benefit curve we just looked at. So here's our marginal benefit. It's decreasing. Marginal cost is increasing. The difference between the two is the marginal net benefit, which, as you see, is big and then gets small, which is why the curve decreases. So at the level of Q, where the marginal benefit curve intersects the marginal cost curve, marginal net benefits are equal to 0. So at this point, where marginal cost equals marginal benefit, marginal net benefit is equal to 0. Again, corresponding to the same pattern we saw on the table. So the level of Q, that level of Q maximizes net benefit. So here's our three tables. Here's our three graphs again. Marginal value, and gets us to this principle. Marginal value curves are the slope of the total value curves. So again, when we're talking about marginal, we're always talking about the slope of totals. So when the control variable is infinitely divisible, meaning we're talking about the continuous case, the slope, and so we graph it. The slope of a total value curve at a given point is the marginal value at that point. In particular, the slope of the total benefit curve at a given Q is the marginal benefit of that level of Q. The slope of the net benefit curve at a given Q is the marginal benefit of that level of Q. All right, so everything we just talked about, make sure you can calculate the numbers, etc., and just understand the relationships and the concepts. Quick note, two last points I want to make. One, if You're in a situation where you're making incremental decisions, and there's incremental benefits and incremental costs, and they don't ultimately wind up being equal. You want to stop at the point where like the marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. If the marginal benefit becomes less than marginal cost, you don't want to go there, right? So that's just what this is saying. And then finally, this last point on learning managerial economics: practice, practice, practice. You got to practice, you got to practice, you got to practice, you got to practice. Have a good weekend.